welcome to this Astranti Strategic Analysis video for the Management Case Study exam for the November 2020 and February 2021 exam sitting. Now, this strategic analysis is going to be on our Management Case Study company Prybloxx, and we're doing this to give you a general idea of what Prybloxx's strategies are going to be, what it currently employs, and where the company may be going in the future. Our hope with this strategic analysis is that it will help you produce more logical answers when you do your exam. After all, anything you suggest in the exam must make strategic sense for the Prescene company. Starting off then, we're going to just briefly go over the case again to remind you who Prybloxx are and what their general position is. So to start with, Prybloxx is a toy manufacturer and it produces a range of plastic bricks that can be clipped to each other. So it has studs and tubes inside the brick that allow them to be combined with each other. That makes them quite durable and easy to take apart and rebuild into something else. Now, these bricks are generally sold as toys for entertainment and education towards children, but they are, of course, available to anyone who actually wants to buy them. Now, as for where Prybloxx is based, it was founded in 2004 in the country of Veranda by Brendan Lee. The business was then quoted on the Veranda Stock Exchange in 2010, upon which Lee sold all of his equity. As far as the wider industry is concerned, the company is the second largest construction toy manufacturer. So within the toy industry, a subset of that industry is of course the construction toy market, and in that market, Prybloxx is the second largest business. However, Prybloxx does face fierce competition in this market from the leading brand and its closest competitor, Constro. So with introductions out of the way, it's time to see how we're going to analyse our Prescene company. And what we're going to use is something called the rational planning model. And this model is going to involve looking at where Prybloxx is now, what its current circumstances are in its business environment, its strengths, its weaknesses, and so forth. And then we're also going to look at Prybloxx's future. What kind of goals does it want to achieve? What's its strategic future in the long term? And then, with these two together, we're going to look at how Prybloxx intends to get from its present circumstances to its future through its business strategy. So what we're going to do now, in order to analyse the now, the future, and the business strategy, we're going to look at a few things. To start with, we're going to look at the mission and the values of the organisation. We're then also going to use what is called a balanced scorecard, which is used to audit the progress of achieving those aims, those values in the mission. What is the governance of Prybloxx? What kind of ethics and corporate social responsibility policies are there? What is a critical success factor for Prybloxx? And of course, an analysis of all of Prybloxx's most relevant stakeholders. We can then look at where the company is by looking at the greater environment by using a pestle analysis. Then if we want to analyse the wider toy industry, we can use Porter's 5 forces. And then we also need to look inside of Prybloxx. We need to understand what its value chain is, how it creates value for its products. And then wrapping up this section, we'll then be using a SWOT analysis to do a company-wide appraisal of what it's good at, what it's weak at, what opportunities it can take, and what are its current threats. Then the last bit of our video will then look at the business strategy. So we'll be looking at the generic strategy from Porter's generic strategy to see where the business currently is. Then based on the information we gather from this, we can then look at the potential strategic options available to Prybloxx through use of the Ansdorf's matrix. Once we've decided on its strategic options, we then need to consider some of the methods of growth, what it can do to actually facilitate growth in the business. And then we'll wrap this up by looking at what the business strategy is, defining it, and what Prybloxx should do going forward. So there's quite a lot to get through here. So we're going to start by looking at the future, because of course we can't really assess what the company should do if we don't know what it intends to achieve. We might look at the present and think, oh, well, Prybloxx are doing quite well. But if we compare it to its future objectives, well, we might find something to the contrary. And we're going to start our analysis of Prybloxx's future by looking at its mission. Now, on the surface, a mission looks relatively simple, but it is very important nonetheless, because what it is it gives the organization some sort of focus. It allows strategy to be formed around it, and it gives direction to the directors and all the staff.
It gives them all a guide and objective with which they need to work towards. And an organization that lacks this kind of strong mission will lack the focus it needs in order to achieve its strategic goals. Now, the first thing Prybloxx has to answer is, what is the purpose of the organization? Why does it exist? Whom does it exist for? And what does the organization hope to achieve in the long term? Well, as far as why the organization exists, well, it's quite simple. It's there to make toys. But it's there to make toys specifically for children. We know from the business model that it wants to attract children at a young age so it can get them into the Prybloxx ecosystem. And then while it isn't specified in the Prescene, we know that what the organization intends to achieve in the long term, what we can assume it wants to achieve in the long term, is to be the largest toy manufacturer in the world, or maybe in Veranda more specifically. So what the purpose does, it gives us focus. It means that Prybloxx are not going to go and start making cars. It means they're not going to start developing mobile phones. We know that Prybloxx exists to make toys, and crucially make toys for children. As for the strategy, well, we need to understand how the organization tends to compete with other businesses and the range of businesses it is operating within. So, we know that Prybloxx intends to compete with other businesses based on the quality of its product while also being cheaper than them. This is a fine business model fine strategy rather to ascribe to, as long as you are the cheapest. But if people value price over quality and a competitor arrives that is cheaper than you, this strategy can fall apart quite quickly. And then more specifically, we have to understand that Prybloxx, while it operates within the toy industry, it operates within a specific subset of the toy market, which is the construction toy market. It operates within this niche, and so it competes with other companies for the attention of children, for the attention of customers who are interested in buying plastic building bricks for their entertainment and education. Now, our strategy feeds into the company's values. What does Prybloxx actually stand for? And we know again from the business model that Prybloxx defines value as a toy that is both entertaining and educational for children and all people who are interested in buying a Prybloxx product. And then lastly, we have the policies, what Prybloxx has in place to ensure that its people act in accordance with the defined purpose, values, and strategy of Prybloxx. Now, nothing is specified in the Prescene as to what Prybloxx's policies are, but we can make a couple of educated assumptions. For starters, it has to be family friendly. It's not going to develop toys which are for people over the age of 18, that are gory, that go outside of its target market. So it has to make sure that it puts policies in place to ensure that its workforce, that its designers build products that are family friendly. It stays within the brand's image. And then, of course, it has to make sure that its toys are crucially safe for children. It has to put policies in place to ensure that procurement acquire materials that are safe for children and it's not going to be toxic to them. This way, the brand's image is secured, and when parents look for Prybloxx, they can assume that it's going to be family friendly and that it's going to be safe for their children. Next on our list of things we're going to look at for the future of Prybloxx is the balance scorecard. Now, a balance scorecard is a way of assessing how effective a business is at achieving its mission objectives. And the reason why we use this as a way of measuring the performance of a business is because we use a mixture of financial and non-financial objectives. We look at the financial perspective of the business, we look at the customer's perspective, we look at how the business is operating internally and what it's doing to innovate on itself. And all of these will include a range of factors that are both financial and non-financial in character. And so what we get then are these four quadrants: the financial perspective, the learning, internal, and customer perspective. Now, in the name of balance, there are some problems with this approach because of the range of issues, which you can even just see a small snippet of on screen right now. Because of the sheer range of issues, it can be very difficult to cut through the noise and find the problems that are going to be the biggest ones, the ones that are most critical to the business to ensure that it gets right. And so this can basically overload management with too much information, and it can be a bit unfocused. So let's look at these a little bit more closely, starting with the financial perspective. Now, of course, one way of measuring the financial performance of a business is, of course, to look at its profit. If it's profitable in 1 year, then it shows that the business has been successful. At least it's managed to avoid making a loss. But most importantly as well, we want to see how much the business is growing. Now, if we think back to our Prescene, we know that Prybloxx only grew by a small percentage, whereas Constro grew by a massive percentage. So it goes to show that Prybloxx's profit growth has slowed down, and this might be something that Prybloxx need to consider. How does it improve its profit growth and ensure that it stays ahead of its competitors? Then as for variance analysis, well, we don't have any information in the Prescene to help us conduct the variance analysis for Prybloxx specifically, but it's nonetheless a very important measure because it allows Prybloxx to assess how well it actually performed against its expected performance. Did it earn more profit than it expected to, or did it earn less? And by knowing that, it can figure out some of the areas in which it needs to improve. Maybe its cost of sales were greater than it expected, and so it needs to look at how it can be more efficient in maybe its manufacturing. Same thing with cash flows. We don't know precisely what Prybloxx's cash flow situation is, but it's going to be important for Prybloxx because we know that its cash in the business is lower than its current liabilities, and that means then that of course it needs to consider raising finance or delaying payment if it needs to, if it doesn't have enough cash in the business at the time when it needs to fulfill its short-term liabilities. But feeding into this then, we can assess the gearing of Prybloxx. We know that Prybloxx's gearing is relatively high. It's over 50%. It's in the 60% range if we use the long-term debt to equity ratio. And so gearing is a good way of measuring how risky Prybloxx is. And we can also use this then to compare Prybloxx against its competitor to see whether Prybloxx is effectively managing its debt compared to Constro. Next, we're going to move on to the learning perspective, and here we're going to be looking at the intangible drivers of Prybloxx's growth, things that are not financial in nature. So to start with, staff motivation. If the production team, if the design team, if the marketing team are going to be productive, they need to be motivated. They need to have a good reason for doing their job. And so staff motivation can be one area in which business growth can either be improved or stunted if it's not effective. But then there's also Prybloxx's research and development spend. Prybloxx needs to ensure that it is researching new toys, new technologies all the time to improve efficiency or make sure that it always maintains and grows its market share. Otherwise, it is opening itself up to competitors to create a new toy, a new product that takes the market by storm and by nature then takes Prybloxx's market share. But research and development, designing new toys, producing them, is worth nothing if your staff aren't adequately trained to do their job. So hours spent training your staff could be a good way of measuring how effective the staff is and whether Prybloxx maybe needs to improve the staff training in some way, give them extra skills so that they can be more competitive in the market. And then feeding into this, of course, is the number of qualified staff. Being a designer is an incredibly skilled job, and so you need your best designers if you want to make the best kinds of toys. We know that Prybloxx definitely does put some stock in its designers, given that it has 150 designers in the design department alone. As for the internal perspective, here we're going to be looking at the business's internal objectives. What are its operational goals and objectives? So, for example, wastage costs, right? It uses a lot of ABS plastic in its operations, and so it needs to make sure that it uses every bit of plastic it can manage. So, of course, it may be that one of the goals for operations is to reduce wastage costs as much as possible. Then there is also the time spent developing new toys. Prybloxx needs to make sure that it gets its toys from its ABS state, from its plastic state, into something that it can sell to customers. And the longer this takes, the more energy it has to use, the longer it takes to actually produce goods from its process. So, of course, it wants to cut down its work in progress time. It wants to cut down the overall time spent developing new toys as much as possible to make the overall process much more efficient. And then is, of course, the manufacturing efficiency, how much wastage, how much time, how much material it uses. The better Prybloxx can be at managing this, the better its overall operations are going to be. And we know from the Prescene that Prybloxx did increase marginally, and so while Constro's did decrease, it might be something that Prybloxx do need to genuinely look into trying to improve. And then lastly, there's also the precision of the finished goods. This is probably one of the most important things, probably the most important factor that Prybloxx needs to get right, because part of its business model relies on the fact that these bricks are compatible with its competitors. So if the bricks are not done to a precise measurement, if they are imprecise in any way, any kind of imperfection in that area will mean the bricks are useless. So it needs to make sure that pretty much 99.999% of the time, all the bricks it produces are precise and that they are compatible with each other. So of course, one thing to measure would be just the number of times that defective products are produced. The more it can bring this number down, the more effective Prybloxx is at producing precise finished goods. And then the customer perspective is where we measure how well Prybloxx is performing in terms of its customers. How is it serving them? How is it achieving its financial objectives by serving customers in the market? And so one measurement we could look at is the number of new customers and repeat customers. So how effective is Prybloxx's sales team actually being in trying to promote the brand, in trying to sell it to customers? We know that one of Prybloxx's more popular customers is schools. So it might be that we measure how many repeat customers we get in terms of schools, whether they come back to Prybloxx and so forth. There are also the number of complaints. This can be an important one for Prybloxx to assess because, of course, it wants to be known as a high-quality brand, so it needs to make sure it maintains that. And so the less complaints it has, we can assume the more high quality, the better, the more durable Prybloxx's products actually are. And then lastly, this is more of a competitive way of measuring the customer perspective. How easily do customers substitute Prybloxx's products with its competitors? The problem at the moment with Prybloxx is that its products are not all that different from its competitors, and there's not a high cost to switching between them. So the question is, how frequently do customers substitute Prybloxx products for maybe Constro's products or the leading brand? If it's relatively high, then Prybloxx need to think of a way of giving some extra value to customers that it can use to keep them with the brand. Now, while I've got your attention at the end of this video, I'd like to make you aware of the other products that Astranti sell as part of the case study course. So the first of these is a series of study text and tuition videos, and these come in two flavors. You have our written study text if you prefer learning through reading, or you can watch our videos if you're more of a visual learner. Now to start with, we have an exam technique study series which breaks down how to succeed at various case study levels. We'll be looking at exam technique, writing style and planning that you need to nail to be successful in your case study exams. And to accompany this, we also have a revision series dedicated to the theory side of things. This is because at the case study level, there is a large amount of theory you need to be capable of using in your case study exam. So what we've done here is we've taken the key areas of the theory from the 3 case study levels and condensed them into a series of chapters to help focus your revision. Moving away from the more generic products and onto the products that are specific to the case study Prescene, the first of these is the Prescene analysis video series. First and foremost, this contains a series of videos where we break down the relevant Prescene at the appropriate level of the qualification, page by page. And throughout this video, we bring out all the key points that could be relevant for you in your exam, looking at various topics and things you might need to consider when revising for the case study. And then to supplement the Prescene analysis, we also have 2 videos. We have the strategic analysis where we give a broad overview of what kind of strategy the Prescene company is using and where it might be going in the future. And then we also look at the top 10 issues that we think this Prescene company might be subject to and something that you may need to take into consideration when revising for the case study. We then provide an industry analysis document and accompanying video. CIMA like to see you demonstrate wider industry knowledge in your exam, and this is what this industry analysis does, as it gives you the wider industry knowledge you need in order to fulfill this requirement. Essentially what it is, it's a large document that we've compiled on all the relevant industry information that we have gathered so that you don't have to do the revision yourself. And then to accompany this, we of course have a video that goes over this document to pick out some of the key points for you if you prefer that. We also produce a number of mock exams for every sitting. We write 5 mock exams for the first exam sitting, and then we add 2 more supplementary mocks for the second exam sitting. We design these mocks around the specific issues relevant to the Prescene and make them as close to the real thing as you will see in the case study exam as possible. So these are a great way to practice your exam technique and test your knowledge of the Prescene company under timed conditions. And then to add value to this product, we also offer a marking and feedback service. So we have a range of highly skilled finance professionals working as freelance staff for us, and it is these staff that provide the marking and feedback service. So this is a great service to use in conjunction with our mock exams, as it gives you a great idea of how you're progressing in the areas you need to work on for your case study exam. And then if you're in need of extra exam practice, we also provide a more generic question pack product. So obviously there are only so many questions you could write about on a specific Prescene. So what this question pack is a series of generic questions on generic scenarios that we come up with at Astranti, whereby we look to test specific topics that come up regularly in the case study exam. So if there is a particular topic you are struggling with and we've only tested once in our mocks, and you'd like more practice on it, then these question packs will be a great product for you to turn to. The penultimate product on this list is a product for those of you who would like to get a full overriding picture in terms of your revision all at once, and these are our masterclasses. So these are our expert tutors who hold 2 masterclasses every exam sitting, and these essentially cover all key aspects that you're going to need to know for your relevant exams. So from particular theories to analyses of the Prescene, all the way through to tips and tricks you can use in your exam. And finally, such is the confidence we have in the quality of our product that if you do purchase a full course from us and you unfortunately do not pass your exam using our product, then we will offer what we call a pass guarantee. So if you did not pass your exam after purchasing our full course, then you will receive the materials for the next exam sitting free of charge. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. I hope you find our products useful, and of course I would like to wish you the best of luck in your exam from everyone at Astranti.